At the Wintercrest Christmas banquet, just as the servers placed the last round of gingerbread soufflés, my daughter made a comment that stung far more quietly and far more deeply than she intended. It happened while guests were exchanging small gifts, the kind meant more for sentiment than value. Someone handed Mia a wrapped box and teased, "Did you get something for your dad this year?" She laughed, not cruelly, not maliciously, just carelessly. "Oh, I didn't," she said. "Dad and I agreed we're not exchanging gifts this year. He's trying to be practical." Then she added, softer but still audible to half the table, "He has enough on his plate right now. Doesn't make sense to spend on someone who's in transition." That word, transition, landed like a pin dropped into a cathedral. A few guests offered sympathetic nods. Some politely redirected their eyes into their plates. Someone murmured, "Tough time of year for job hunting." Mia didn't mean to humiliate me. She was parroting what she thought was a harmless, grown-up explanation. But it reduced my identity to a caricature, a financially struggling, slightly inept parent. My face heated. My hearing tunneled for a moment beneath the clinking glasses and faint carols. I forced a small smile, but embarrassment pulsed in my chest like something trying to claw its way out. Across the table, Harris, my ex-wife's husband, shifted awkwardly. He offered me a tight, apologetic smile, the kind that suggested he wanted to separate himself from the remark but didn't quite have the nerve. Deirdre glanced at me too, a quick flicker of guilt before she schooled her expression. She should have corrected our daughter, clarified things, but she didn't. That small silence said more than any words. I tried to swallow the moment and let the dinner continue. But the humiliation stirred something else, a memory I had been trying to ignore for months. The trust. Tucked inside my coat pocket was a thin leather folder. I carried it seldom, but tonight I had slipped it in before leaving the house. Not out of spite, not out of anticipation, but because earlier that morning the trust's attorney had called, asking me to sign an updated stewardship clause. I hadn't had time to drop the papers off, so I kept them with me. A coincidence. Or maybe not. The trust had rules. Rules written by my grandfather long before Mia or I were born. Rules about stewardship, responsibility, and the importance of understanding where support truly came from. I didn't stand immediately. I didn't announce anything. I sat there with the weight of those papers against my ribs, feeling a slow-burning conflict rise in me. Would speaking up help her? Or punish her? Would staying silent protect her? Or enable her? Mia, unaware of the small storm she'd created, continued chatting with friends, waving off compliments about her boutique business and her self-made discipline. I exhaled, a long, steady breath. Then I pushed my chair back, quietly. The scrape drew a few glances, but not the entire room. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a father standing when he didn't usually stand. "Mia," I said gently. She turned, smiling lightly. What's up, Dad?" I rested a hand on the leather folder. "I'd like to clear something up, just so there are no misunderstandings." Conversations hushed, not silenced, but softened, like a tide going out. "I heard what you said about being practical," I continued, "and I know you meant no harm. But there's something you don't know." Her brow creased, a flicker of confusion. I opened the folder just enough for her, and only her, to see the papers inside. "This is the Harlow Family Stewardship Trust, the fund that has been supporting parts of your life since you were 18. She blinked, breath catching faintly. Not loud enough for drama, just enough for truth. Harris's fork froze halfway to his plate. Deirdre closed her eyes briefly, guilt settling on her shoulders. I didn't spread the documents. I didn't announce numbers. I didn't shame her. "I never told you," I said quietly, "because the trust required anonymity, and because I wanted you to feel capable, not dependent." Mia's expression tightened, confusion, disbelief, a ripple of hurt. "Dad," she whispered. "Why would you? Why now?" "Because," I said, steadying myself, "the trust also requires reevaluation if the beneficiary starts misunderstanding where support comes from." And tonight, something shifted. I closed the folder without revealing a single figure to the guests. "I'm not suspending anything tonight," I added softly, "but I am initiating a review. We'll talk in private. Not here." A breath of relief flickered across her face, tangled with unease. Around us, the room exhaled. Conversations resumed in small, subdued waves. Mia lowered her gaze to the tablecloth, her hand trembling slightly beside her untouched dessert. And that was when I knew the holidays would not end the way they'd begun. The rest of the room didn't return to normal so much as rearrange itself around a new, brittle axis. Conversations resumed, but the laughter had smaller volume, and the smiles wore a cautious edge. Plates were cleared with slightly more force. A woman 2 tables over kept looking toward our corner, as if trying to map how the evening had shifted. I sat for a long moment, feeling the leather folder like a small weight against my thigh. My heart thudded in a rhythm I couldn't name. Annoyance, shame, responsibility all tangled together. For a second, I wondered whether standing up had been an impulsive performance, whether I'd let public shame steer me into something I'd regret. My hands, normally steady, were warm with a tremor I hadn't expected. Mia didn't speak to me for a few rounds of small talk. When she finally did, her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard earlier, annoyance threaded with a guardedness more practiced than frightened. "You could have told me sooner," she said, low enough for just my ears. "Why keep this secret? Why make me look like an idiot?" She wasn't contrite yet. She was testing, defending a carefully held identity. "I tried to," I said. "There are reasons, honor-bound ones. But we can talk about this, Mia. We will." She scoffed softly and looked away. For a beat, she was the same woman I'd watched on Instagram last month. Confident, dismissive, used to people assuming her competence. Then something cracked, a micro-expression of doubt, and she folded inward, fingers worrying the edge of her napkin. Across from us, Harris shifted his weight. He had laughed earlier at Mia's joke. Now there was a small wrinkle between his eyebrows, almost imperceptible. He picked at the rim of his wine glass, antsy. I could tell he was calculating. The easy social posture that had carried him through so many rooms fighting against the human impulse to do the right thing. When he finally spoke, his voice was guarded. "Look," he said quietly, "if she needs a clarification, I can help with that. She listens to me sometimes. Not everything has to become a production." It was not quite conciliatory, but it wasn't gloating either. He wanted to be useful and unexposed at the same time. That conflicted motion made him, oddly, more real. Deirdre, meanwhile, had gone a different color. She had always been the quiet center between us, protective in ways she never named. Tonight she kept her jaw tight. When no one was looking, she pinched the inside of her wrist, a small, private sign of distress. Once, her eyes met mine, and there was a complex flicker, guilt, fear, and a trace of relief, like someone who had been carrying a secret load and finally felt the straps loosening. We slipped out to the terrace after the crowd thinned. The air hit like a cold hand. The string lights cast halos over the snow, and there was a sharp, almost metallic tang in the air, snow water running off the iron rail, or perhaps the residue of the street plow. A mug of cider steamed on a nearby ledge, its scent unexpectedly sharp with clove. The world felt small and edged. "I don't know how to fix this," Mia said after a long silence. Her voice had moved from defense towards something rawer. "I built a version of myself. People saw it. Now what do they think I am?" "You built real things," I said. "You have talent." The trust was never meant to erase that. It was meant to be a scaffold, not a stage light. She laughed once, humorless. "A scaffold that hid the building entirely. How am I supposed to reconcile that?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I hesitated, felt that small interior argument again. Ignore the intrusion, keep the conversation private. I pulled the device free. A text from the trust's legal office flashed. "Mr. Harlow, per our earlier call, initiating procedural review will trigger an automated compliance hold until counsel completes verification. Please confirm if you authorize." My lungs tightened. I had signed an updated clause that morning, an administrative housekeeping item that had seemed trivial. Counsel had warned the system was sensitive. I had nodded, thinking only of paperwork. I hadn't understood that initiating a review could set a chain of automated safeguards in motion. I read it again. My hand pressed the phone against my palm. Mia saw the screen. Her face went white, not with staged shock, but with a real, animal panic I hadn't yet seen. For a second, she looked years younger, small, undone. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," I said, every part of me suddenly aware of consequence. "It means the review we talked about may already have started on someone else's timeline. The trust is automated in parts. There may be a temporary hold placed while counsel verifies. I didn't mean for it to happen like this tonight." Her breath hitched. The terrace felt suddenly smaller, the lights closer, as if the world itself leaned forward to watch. At that moment, from inside the ballroom, a voice called out. Light, startled. Is everything all right out here? We could send someone to get coats. It was one of the guests, the woman who'd been watching us earlier. Her concern was ordinary, but layered now with curiosity. People were watching. Whispers would multiply. I looked at Mia, at Deirdre's top profile, and felt the old moral problem I'd been trying to manage with legal papers instead expose itself as something far less tidy. The review wasn't an academic exercise anymore. It was a pressure that could change rent checks, lease payments, a life built on quiet wires. Snow tracked a cold seam down the railing. My phone buzzed again. This time, an automated alert. Preliminary compliance hold placed on discretionary distributions. The air around us narrowed. The polite, fragile pause that had followed the dinner turned into the first real crack. Tomorrow would not be about conversations. It would be about administration, consequences, and the visible unraveling of a life Mia had thought she understood. I barely slept. The trust email replayed in my mind like a looping alarm. Compliance review initiated. Temporary hold active. Temporary. A thin, dangerous word. By the time morning light crawled across my kitchen tiles, the weight of the leather folder felt heavier than any financial burden I'd ever carried. At 8:04 a.m., Mia called. No greeting. Just breathing. The shaky kind you hear through your own ribs. Dad, she said finally. Did the trust do this? My rent portal says there's a verification pause. The boutique's vendor dashboard says funds are under review. And my card. Her voice splintered. I expected anger. Instead, she sounded disoriented. Like the ground she'd built her life on had tilted without warning. It shouldn't be this fast, I answered truthfully. The system must have taken last night's action as a behavioral trigger. I didn't intend immediate repercussions. Mia didn't absorb the reassurance. My landlord called at 7 a.m. He said the review flag showed up on his end. He asked if I was moving. There it was. Not eviction. Something more humiliating, uncertainty. I opened my mouth to respond, but a sharp knock cut through my living room. 3 hard raps. Authoritative. Unexpected. Dad, Mia asked. What was that? Hold on. I opened the door to find her boutique partner, Camila, standing in the hallway. Eyes puffy, coat thrown over pajamas, a tote bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't say hello. What's going on with the business account? She asked, voice tight. Our supplier emailed me, not Mia. They said payments from your end were delayed because of some trust audit. They're threatening to reroute our inventory. Her fear wasn't theatrical. It was the practical kind, the kind that keeps small entrepreneurs awake at night. I motioned her inside. Camila, let me make some calls. No, she said. I need to hear from Mia. But she isn't answering. Her worry turned to suspicion. You didn't pull funding to punish her, did you? I felt that like a stab. No, I said. This isn't punishment. It's a compliance mechanism that activated too quickly. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed again. Mia texting. Tell Camila I'm coming over. Don't explain anything without me. The emotional whiplash in that text told me everything. Mia wasn't stable. Not angry, not apologetic, adrift. Camila exhaled sharply. This could ruin us. She wasn't wrong. The boutique depended on stable vendor relationships. Even a hint of financial inconsistency was enough for suppliers to pivot to other stores. As if the situation weren't volatile enough, my next call came from the trust's compliance director. A single person now, not a board, not a cluster of voices. Mr. Harlow, she said, the hold is procedural. We just need verification documents for the last 12 months. But your daughter's spending patterns triggered a risk flag we need to discuss. Risk flag, I repeated. She hesitated. Several large purchases tagged as business expenses were made without supporting invoices. It may be nothing, but until we verify, some institutions will react cautiously. That dropped into my stomach like a stone. Mia wasn't reckless with money, but she was loose with labels, charging things under the boutique name that weren't actually business-related. Snowball purchases. Appearances. Things she assumed she'd juggle later. Another knock, lighter this time. I braced myself. It was Deirdre. She stepped into the apartment quietly, setting down a container of soup like it was a peace offering. Her eyes were rimmed with red. We need to talk before Mia gets here. Camila murmured something about giving us privacy and stepped into the hallway. Deirdre didn't sit. She hovered like a person carrying too many truths. This isn't all Mia's doing, she said. I played a part in this mess. More than you know. My breath thinned. What do you mean? She wrung her hands. I let her think she was more financially independent than she was. I never corrected her when Harris embellished his contribution. I didn't want to embarrass her. Or him. Or myself. There it was, the withheld piece from last night. Not malice. Fear. Fear of disrupting the image she thought her daughter needed. Before I could respond, Mia arrived. Hair unbrushed, jacket half-zipped, panic sitting on her shoulders like a physical weight. She didn't hug her mother. She didn't look at Camila. Her eyes locked onto me. Dad, they flagged my accounts as risky, she whispered. Her voice broke on the last word. Yes, I said softly. But that doesn't mean what you think. It just means they need documentation. Mia shook her head violently. I don't have documentation for half of it. There it was. Not villainy. Not irresponsibility. Just the truth. She'd been piecing together a life on mismatched assumptions. Camila stepped forward, trying to stay calm. We can fix this, Mia. But we need clarity. Mia pressed trembling fingers to her temples. Everyone is watching. My landlord, the vendors, people from the gala, they're whispering. I saw a post this morning. Someone wrote that I'm funding my life off loopholes. The humiliation was becoming public. And public humiliation has its own consequences. Before I could comfort her, my phone buzzed again. A new message from the trust. Urgent notice. If verification documents are not submitted by Monday, the compliance hold will escalate to a formal suspension. Mia saw the alert over my shoulder. Her knees wobbled. Oh my God, she whispered. Dad, please. Her fear pierced through every layer of pride she'd ever worn. And for the first time, I realized the review wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a collapse neither of us had measured properly. When I stepped into Mia's living room that afternoon, the air felt brittle, like a glass ornament hanging by a frayed thread. The neighborhood forum had done its quiet work. Questions, insinuations, and a screenshot that suggested scandal. But those were background noise now. The real problem stood on my doorstep. There were 3 of them. Mr. Alvarez, our landlord, looked every bit the pragmatic man he was. Mid-50s, neat coat, a clipboard with a typed form tucked under his arm. Beside him stood a bank compliance officer I'd never met, smartly dressed, badge clipped to her lapel. Camila hovered in the doorway, clutching a toad of canceled orders. Deirdre lingered in the kitchen, hands folded so tight her knuckles were white. They didn't wait for tea. I'm sorry to barge in, Mr. Alvarez said, voice polite but thin. But the property management asked me to request documentation for lease renewal, proof of income, payment history, things like that. They received an automated flag this morning. He tapped the clipboard. It's a precaution, Mr. Harlow, not a threat. But they asked us to be thorough. The bank officer introduced herself as Clara Finch. Her clipboard had a printed notice, preliminary risk alert, discrepancies noted in discretionary distributions. She laid it on the coffee table like a verdict. We're required, she said without heat, to pause certain outgoing authorizations linked to accounts that show irregular vendor labeling. For the boutique's processor, that appears as business expenses that lack supporting invoices. We've issued a temporary risk hold pending verification. It can be lifted if documentation is supplied within 72 hours. Her tone was corporate calm. The effect was anything but calm. Mia's face went from pale to flushed. For a second, she looked as if she might scream. This is absurd, she snapped, louder than she meant to. My father pays donations sometimes, because he's generous, and we run legitimate campaigns. You can't freeze us over paperwork. Her anger arrived like a physical thing, hot, fast, and aimed. I felt it hit me more than the officers. She was swinging, not yet distinguishing between the man whose secrecy had protected her and the system that now exposed her. Please, I said quietly, trying to anchor the room. Clara, there must be a way to prioritize small business continuity while you do your checks. Clara's blue eyes softened for a moment. We can work with provisional arrangements. But we need evidence of business activity, contracts, invoices, supplier confirmations. And the Trust Council must confirm the trustee has authorized these payments as legitimate business disbursements. Harris, who'd shown up earlier and hovered by the window, stepped forward, smoothing his tie. He'd been one of the first to post a supportive comment in the forum. Now he spoke like a man calculating social risk. Clara, I can make some calls, he offered. I know a procurement guy who might vouch for them. Help fast-track verification. His tone carried two things, genuine and carefully measured. He wanted to help. He also wanted the optics to settle without his name being dragged through the mud. Mia's anger shifted suddenly to accusation. She jabbed a finger toward me. You should have told me, Dad. This secrecy has become the thing that ruins me. You hid it, and now I'm the one being auctioned off by banks and landlords. The accusation landed like a punch. For a beat, I simply felt it. Hot sorrow, a parent's shame flaring in private like a match. I wanted to answer with logic, with the clauses and intentions of the trust. Instead, I felt a different weight, the living cost of my choices. Daughter, I started, then stopped. I had rehearsed this moment in the void of sleepless nights and legal emails, but none of that prepared me for the way my voice felt small in the room. Deirdre finally stepped forward. Her voice was thin. Mia, I thought I was protecting you. I didn't correct things when Harris oversold his contributions. I let this become easier to carry than I should have. Her confession wasn't full. She didn't explain why she'd stayed silent, but it put a new shape to the problem. It wasn't all my secrecy. It was a shared architecture of small deceptions. Clara flipped through her folder and then paused on a printed ledger. She tapped a line. There's something else. We found an incoming routing labeled as personal settlement to an external account. It's small, but unusual for a business account. Her tone was careful. We need to know who authorized that. Silence widened. Camila's fingers tightened on her tote. Harris's jaw worked. Mia's mouth opened and closed. My heart kicked with a focused, animal panic, because that little line could change everything. An unexplained routing could be read as misclassification, or worse, misappropriation. No one authorized anything that wasn't recorded, I said, too quickly. My hands felt like they might tremble. If there's a specific transfer, show me. Clara passed the ledger over. The numbers glowed black on white. There it was, a notation with a reference code I didn't recognize and a beneficiary name that wasn't Mia's boutique. I can pull the specifics, she said. But if this is unaccounted for, compliance escalates. We're obliged to notify counsel and freeze distributions until cleared. Mia's face folded. She sagged into the sofa, winded. I can't, she whispered. I don't even know that name. Harris inhaled and then exhaled like someone gearing up for a performance. Let me help. Let me call my people. He meant it in part. He also meant to be seen doing it. I looked at Mia then, at Deirdre, at the ledger, at the small, precise print that had the power to turn precaution into calamity. We'll get you the documents, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We'll find the source of that transfer. Clara closed her folder politely. If you produce documentation within 72 hours, we'll move to lift the hold. Otherwise, the temporary pause will escalate. She left the ledger on the table like a silent judge and walked toward the door. Mr. Alvarez followed her out with a polite nod. When the door shut, the room felt suddenly too small. Mia looked at me with something like accusation and pleading braided together. Dad, what else are you hiding? I had no full answer. Only this. The ledger had introduced a new, poisonous question. Whoever that payment had gone to, or whoever had routed it, could reframe my intent from guardian to something far harder to bear. That night, I folded the leather folder closed. The papers inside seemed suddenly insufficient for answering the ledger's small, terrible mystery. The ledger didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It simply sat there on my dining table under the yellow kitchen light, its single unexplained entry glowing like a quiet warning. $1,240.29. Personal settlement / external beneficiary. A line with no context. No invoice. No memo. Small enough to be nothing. Specific enough to be everything. That morning, I stared at it alone, coffee untouched, heart steady but heavy. I had spent 2 days bracing Mia from consequences, but this was different. This wasn't emotional fallout. It was a question the trust couldn't ignore. Where did this money come from, and why was it hidden? For the first time, a thought flickered through me like an unwelcome intruder. What if I don't know my daughter as well as I think I do? Before I could chase the thought, my phone buzzed. A message from the trust office. Not Clara, not counsel, but automated. New inquiry generated. Reviewing account clusters. Please prepare beneficiary records. The phrasing snagged on me. Account clusters. Plural. Which meant the ledger entry wasn't alone. That was when the fear hit. Not panic. Not anger. A colder, quieter fear. What if this wasn't a one-off mistake? Just as that thought slid into place, there was a soft knock at the door. Not the frantic interruptions of the last chapter, but a hesitant, almost apologetic sound. It was Mia. No makeup. Hair in a loose knot. Hoodie, leggings, and a look I hadn't seen on her face since she was 6 years old and broke her grandmother's vase. "Can I come in?" she asked. She wasn't panicked. Not angry. Not crying. This was worse. She was bracing. I let her in. She saw the ledger on the table and stopped mid-step. "Oh," a single syllable, but full of recognition. "You know what this is?" I asked gently. "I know it's bad," she said, "but I don't know what exactly you're seeing." I pushed the ledger toward her, not accusing, not softening. "Mia, this entry has no explanation. No attached document. No vendor." And the system flagged it. She didn't sit. She wrapped her arms around herself instead. "Dad, I need you to understand something before I tell you anything." There it was. Defensiveness. The emotional layer she hadn't shown yet. Better than panic. More human. "I didn't do anything illegal," she said. "I didn't steal. I didn't cheat. But I did something stupid, and I thought it wouldn't matter." She took a slow breath. "Last year, when the boutique was starting, I borrowed from the wrong person." My brain tightened. "Borrowed?" She nodded. "One of Harris's colleagues. Not close, just someone who offered to help with startup costs. A small loan. Unofficial." My heartbeat picked up, not anger, but dread. "Mia, why didn't you come to me?" She swallowed. "Because I didn't think I deserved to ask you anymore. I thought you'd stop helping me if you saw how messy the business looked." The admission hit harder than the ledger. "You routed a repayment through the boutique account?" I asked. She nodded. "I thought it wouldn't matter. It wasn't trust money, not directly. It was repayment from my personal savings, but I sent it through the boutique system because," she winced, "because I panicked." There it was. Not a crime. Not a scam. Just a bad, naive decision. But the trust system didn't care about intention. "It was only once," she said quickly. "I swear. And I wasn't hiding it from you. I was hiding it from everyone. I didn't want people thinking I was begging for money." The shame in her voice burned through the room. Before I could respond, she added something that tightened the world around me. "And Dad, I didn't tell Mom. Or Harris. And now that guy, the one I borrowed from, messaged me back this morning. He heard something about an audit. He wants to talk." A chill cracked through me. Because that was the escalation I needed. Not a compliance officer at the door. Not a landlord. Not Harris confessing. A person outside the family now knew something was wrong. A financier. A man with leverage. Someone who could spin this however he wanted. Mia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think he's going to make this worse." Silence stretched. I had two choices. Protect her or force full disclosure. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt anger flicker. At myself for hiding the trust, at her for hiding this loan, at Deirdre and Harris for papering over problems. But beneath the anger was something else, resolve. I sat down, opened the ledger, and said, "Give me his name." Mia tensed. "Dad, please don't escalate this." "Give me his name," I repeated. "If he's contacting you now, the trust office will see it soon. I need to control this before someone else does." Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something harder. Fear of being exposed, fear of disappointing me, fear of losing control of the story she built. She whispered the name, a name I recognized, a name that should never have been near my daughter. The moment she said it, I made a decision, my decision, not the trust's. Tomorrow morning, we call counsel. And then we call him. Together. Mia sat down finally, shoulders collapsing with the weight of a year's worth of secrets. "Dad," she whispered, voice breaking for the first time, "I'm terrified." So was I? But this time, terror wasn't the end of the chapter. It was the start of the truth. The ledger still felt like an accusing finger on the table. One unexplained line. One small sum that had become the nucleus of everything wrong. I'd spent the morning staring at it until the paper blurred and the numbers made no sense. The trust's automated notices had suggested the entry was part of a larger cluster, account clusters, but until now that had been an abstract irritation. Then the email arrived that turned irritation into threat. Review update. External entity inquiry. Simple subject line. Not a knock on the door, not a whisper. A flat instrument of escalation. I read it 3 times before I saw the paragraph that mattered. An external party had submitted matching transaction data, triggering a cross-account review. The trust systems were designed to protect assets. They were not designed to be gentle about collateral damage. Whoever that external party was had just turned an internal paper trail into a public question. That was the single escalation I could not ignore. Everything else, rumors, forum screenshots, anxious landlords, were background noise now. Someone outside the family had put us on a map the trust could not unsee. Mia arrived then, breathless from walking, hoodie wrapped tight. She didn't look like someone panicking. She looked small, raw in a way she rarely let anyone see. I saw the email, she said without preamble. Gavin messaged me last night. He said something like, "I've got a file. We should talk." She paused, as if measuring her next words. This was the moment she might have lied, spun, or blamed someone else. Instead, she hesitated, picked at a loose thread on the sleeve of her hoodie, and admitted the truth with halting confession. "I borrowed from him when the boutique was fragile," she said. "It was small. I paid him back. I always thought it was personal. I thought, stupidly, that no one would ever connect it to anything else." Her defensiveness had a half-beat. She wanted to minimize, to keep the shame localized. That small pause made her human, not a plot device. I felt the shock turn into a very sharp, hot current. Anger. Not at her. At Gavin. At the architecture that let this spiral. At the adults who had kept secrets thinking they were keeping soft landings. The ledger was a symptom. Gavin was the vector. "I'll get ahead of it," I said. The words left my mouth like a decision already made. It surprised even me how decisive they sounded. Standing there, with the ledger between us, I realized the only way to stop things from metastasizing was to be the first voice to describe what happened. Mia looked at me with a mix of relief and fear. "Don't escalate," she begged. "If Gavin freaks, he'll tell them everything. Then we make the first call," I said. "We tell the truth on our terms, not through a stranger's complaint." Deirdre, who had been in the kitchen with a mug she hadn't finished, stepped forward. For the first time in days, she looked not just guilty but personally threatened. "If this blows up," she said, voice thin, "it won't just ruin Mia. My job is tied to my reputation, our whole life. I thought I was protecting her. I didn't know Gavin would be this." Her hands trembled. "I can't lose everything." Her fear made the stakes corrosive and immediate. This was no longer about paperwork. It was about livelihoods, reputations, and a family's fragile architecture. I sat down, the ledger between us like a small altar of truth. My internal debate flickered. Protect my daughter by shielding her from exposure, or protect her by forcing a full, ugly airing that might hurt in the short term but keep worse from happening later. For the first time in weeks, I felt a real, moral choice press on me. I chose the harder line. "No hiding," I said. "We call Gavin. I call counsel. We lay out exactly what happened. We offer to produce records. We put transparency between us and whatever he's trying to do." Mia's lips trembled. "You'll be honest about the trust?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be honest about the trust. I'll explain it was never meant to be a cover. I'll show the trust's records were appropriate. That may hurt now, but if we don't control the narrative, someone else will, and they'll spin it for leverage." There was a ragged bravery to her next breath. "All right, but I need to be there. I need to say it myself." "You will," I promised. "You'll say it soberly, not defensive. You'll own the mess." I picked up my phone and called counsel. The voice on the other end was composed but alert. I explained succinctly. Counsel immediately scheduled an emergency conference call for first thing in the morning and said a measured thing that made my gut tighten. If an external entity is involved, we need a statement and indemnity options ready. Prepare all records of transfers for the past 5 years. 5 years. The scope snapped wider than I'd expected. It wasn't just a ledger line anymore. It was a forensic sweep. Before we hung up, I texted Gavin with a single line. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, noon. You, me, Mia, counsel present. No surprises." I didn't know if he'd reply. I didn't know if he'd show. The rest of the afternoon felt like the eye of a storm. Deirdre packed a small bag as if she might have to leave town. Mia sat on the sofa and tried to make a list of receipts she half remembered. I opened the ledger and traced the digits of the one line again, thinking of balance and debt and what families owe one another beyond money. When night came, I lay awake not because of fear, but because I'd made a choice I couldn't unmake. It was dangerous and necessary. Transparency in the face of someone else's leverage. Tomorrow, Gavin would either help us defuse this by cooperating, or he would make the ledger the instrument of his leverage. Either way, we would not let a stranger set the terms of our truth. The conference room smelled faintly of disinfectant and new carpet, the kind of sterile place where truths get dragged into fluorescent light whether you want them to or not. I got there 10 minutes early. I needed the stillness to settle into my spine. Today had one purpose: get answers from Gavin Rowe. No rumors. No trust alerts. No spiraling assumptions. One conversation. Face to face. Mia arrived moments later, wrapped in a charcoal coat, hair pulled back. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, not the panic of the past few days. More like someone preparing for impact. "Dad," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from me. "If he twists the story, I need to speak for myself." Her voice didn't shake. It was the calm of someone who'd crossed from fear into resolve. "You'll speak," I assured her, "but I'll handle the opening." She nodded, not fully confident, but committed. When the door opened, Gavin Rowe walked in without ceremony. Mid-40s, polished, carrying the air of a man who'd been around enough back rooms to read tension instantly. He offered a half-smile, the kind that said nothing and everything at once. "Sam," he greeted. "Didn't expect a full legal setup. You've upgraded." "I didn't invite you for nostalgia," I replied. Counsel entered last, professional and contained. She thanked Gavin for showing up, then took her seat as if preparing for deposition rather than discussion. I started. "Gavin, we have one question. Did you submit anything to the trust, to a bank, to any third party that triggered the audit on Mia's account?" He paused. A small, telling beat. Not guilt, calculation. Then he shook his head. "No, I didn't file anything. I didn't even know there was a trust involved." The room held its breath. Mia frowned. "But you messaged me yesterday. You said something came across your desk." "It did," he said calmly. "But it wasn't from me." Counsel leaned forward. "Explain." Gavin steepled his fingers, choosing his words carefully. "A woman called me 2 days ago. Asked about a past transaction with Mia, the loan, the repayment. She said she was verifying discrepancies for compliance." He raised his brows. Sounded legit, but she gave no formal ID. My stomach tightened. Counsel's expression hardened. "That was not us." Gavin nodded as if he'd expected that. "Exactly. Which is why I messaged Mia. I wanted her to know someone was sniffing around." Mia swallowed. "Did she say where she got my name?" "Not directly," Gavin said. "She mentioned public chatter and a flagged transaction cluster. Sounded like she'd seen something online." My pulse thudded once, heavy. The forum leak. The screenshot. The comments. Someone had used those breadcrumbs to track Gavin down. Counsel exhaled, a controlled, measured breath. "This is concerning. Impersonating a compliance officer is a serious offense. Whoever contacted you may be gathering information to submit a complaint." Gavin lifted a shoulder. "Or they're selling it to someone who will." Mia stiffened. Her voice was thin. "Who would want to investigate me?" Gavin gave her a look that held a strange blend of sympathy and realism. "People don't always need motives," he said. "Sometimes scandal is currency." The sentence landed like cold metal. "Sam, focus." I steadied myself. "Do you have the number she called from?" "I do," he said. "Didn't block her. Figured you might need it." He slid his phone across the table. Counsel photographed the screen immediately. "We'll trace it." Gavin rose, smoothing his coat. "Look, I'm not here to make this worse. I'll sign whatever you need to clear the payment." It was personal, not business. A human hesitation flickered across his eyes, the first sign of vulnerability from him. "And Sam, for what it's worth," he added quietly, "people smell weakness and opportunity. You're not the only family in this town with enemies you've never met." Then he left. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Mia stared at the door, her voice barely audible. "Dad, someone is pretending to be compliance. Someone is investigating me on purpose." I reached for her hand, not to comfort her, but to ground both of us. "This isn't about your mistake anymore," I said. "Someone saw an opening and stepped into it. The audit, the rumors, the call, they're all part of one thread." Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. "Why me?" "Not you," I said. "Us." I stood, not out of anger, but purpose. Today we stop reacting. We start investigating. Counsel nodded. I'll begin with the number. You two should prepare a clean financial timeline, no omissions. If someone is building a case, we need to be ahead of every angle. Mia breathed out, shaky but determined. Okay, I can do that. As we left the building, snow began to fall, quiet, relentless. Dad? Mia said, pulling her coat closer. What if this person files a complaint before we figure out who they are? I looked ahead, jaw set. Then we make sure whoever is pulling the strings gets exposed before they pull tighter. Because now this wasn't just about paperwork or secrets. Someone had chosen our family as a target. And I was done letting them work in the dark. When counsel phoned with the trace result, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the ledger open like an accusation. The number matched the PI firm Gavin had described, the same private outfit that sold discreet verification. The call came slow, clinical. We traced the originating request, Clara said. It routes back through an intermediary. The referral name on file is Harris Langford. For a second, everything in the room stilled. Not because I couldn't believe it, but because believing it simplified a messy ache into a sharp, human hurt. I didn't want to confront him through counsel. I wanted the bluntness of an honest conversation. I called Harris and arranged he come over that night. Deirdre sat in the living room. Quiet, the kind of quiet that had become a pattern between them. Polite distance, households of separate small deceptions. When Harris arrived, he was not theatrically defensive. He looked smaller. His suit had lost its sheen. He sat down and put his hands together the way a man does when he's trying to be useful and finding he lacks the tools. I started it, he said before I could ask. I called a contact, someone who said they could look into the boutique's vendor marks, quietly. I thought if there were any red flags I could handle them before they reached you, Sam. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to look like someone who could fix things. The words came out in a rush when they came at all. Fear of being irrelevant threaded through each syllable. He flinched as if he could already see the cost. You used a stranger to poke through my daughter's finances, I said, the sentence more fact than accusation. You created the opening. His shoulders dropped. I thought I was protecting her from humiliation. I didn't think they'd impersonate compliance. I never. Mia stood then. For all her composed lines in recent days, she hadn't had the one moment she needed. The clean, necessary collapse that makes the rest possible. She slammed a hand on the table hard enough for cups to rattle. You lied for me, she said, voice breaking. You lied to me so I wouldn't have to know how much someone else paid my bills. You treated me like I was a story you needed to manage. That was the crack the room needed. Rage, betrayal, and a long pent-up exhaustion flooded out of her. She paced, then sat and covered her face with both hands. For a moment she was 16 again, raw and bewildered. Deirdre closed her eyes. I thought it would spare you the pain, she whispered. I was wrong. Harris hung his head. I thought if I could smooth the edges, if I could step in, then maybe you'd see me as reliable. Not some man who needs to prove himself compared to a quiet ex who does his charity in secret. His confession was not a tidy apology. It revealed the small, human vanity that had set the whole sequence in motion. Fear of irrelevance, the desire to be seen as indispensable. That made the betrayal sharper in its realism. Counsel's guidance came next, voluntary disclosure, full documentation, and an offer of remedial terms rather than punitive suspension. The trust would require a clear accounting. It would place Mia under conditional oversight for 6 months, monthly statements, a budgeting course, and a public clarification. There was also a practical cost, an administrative review fee the trust could bill against distributions for the month. Nothing ruinous, but not trivial either. Mia took it like someone receiving a surgical diagnosis, precise, sober, and ultimately actionable. That steadied her. It didn't undo the humiliation, but it offered a path that demanded honest work. We'll do it, she said at last, voice tired but steady. I'll publish a statement explaining the misclassification. I'll reconcile vendors. I'll take the bookkeeping course at night. I'll work the clinic shifts. I'll do what it takes. Harris's face folded at that. I'll tell everyone I called, he said. I'll retract what I asked of them. And he stopped, as if deciding what was proper to offer. I'll step back from the boutique's public role. It's my mess to clean. There was a cost in that sentence we all felt. The recalibration of a marriage, the recognition that image had been bought with other people's comfort. Deirdre reached across and put her hand over his for a moment, a small, complicated gesture that suggested repair without easy absolution. In the days that followed, we did the work the trust required. We compiled receipts, invoices, and bank statements until the ledger line lost its thunder and read instead as an explainable error nested in a pattern of sloppier bookkeeping. The PI firm scrubbed their notes when counsel threatened action. The blogger retracted a piece after a formal demand. The town kept whispering, as towns do, but the worst of it receded. The trust's ruling landed on a gray morning. Conditional oversight, mandatory budgeting classes, and a 6-month staged reinstatement. The administrative fee was deducted. It was a real consequence, tactile enough to remind Mia of accountability, yet calibrated to allow repair. A month later, in a small, unadorned kitchen, we sat down for dinner. No chandeliers, no audience. Mia slid a thin, dog-eared notebook across to me. On the first page she had written, plain and unadorned, rent paid. Receipts logged. Called Gavin. Told the truth. She watched me read it like someone afraid of how the world would judge her every small step. I closed the notebook and tucked it into my jacket pocket, not as a trophy, but as a ledger of living. Outside, snow fell slow and steady. Inside, the clatter of spoons and the low hum of conversation felt ordinary, which was a mercy. The ledger that had once burned with accusations sat in my drawer, its paper softened by handling. It wasn't erased, its line remained. But the way we treated it had changed. On the walk home later, Mia took my arm with a lightness that wasn't triumph, but a fragile rebalancing. "You didn't owe me a performance," she said quietly. "You did things that mattered." I looked at her, at the small, careful person she'd chosen to become, and felt something like relief and like a new obligation all at once. "No," I said. "I didn't." We walked through the fresh snow in silence, footsteps soft, not trying to outrun the past, but to step forward with it in view.